The three sisters of the native indigenous American agriculture. These plants protect and nourish each other as they grow. And the Native Americans were doing this at least 3,000 years. We were talking about this today over dinner as we were eating corn nachos with our food. But we talked about the plants that came to us from the New World. According to food historian Louise Ellen Frank, and she says potatoes, tomatoes, corn, beans, squash, chili, cocoa, and vanilla, these magic 8 ingredients that were found and used only in the Americas before 1492, were taken via the Columbian exchange back to the Old World, dramatically transforming the cuisine there. Besides that, we know that tomatoes came from, we said tomatoes, but also turkeys, okay? Now, concerning the way they grew these plants, according to Chavonda Jacobs-Young, PhD Administrator, Agricultural Research Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture, in agricultural parlance, the three sisters are crops planted together in a shared space. It's corn, which is maize, beans, and squash. Developed through indigenous agricultural practices, these three plants protect and nourish each other in different ways as they grow and provide a solid diet for their cultivators. The intercropping method of planting corn, beans, and squash together, commonly called the Three Sisters, has been studied and described by scholars in anthropology, history, and agriculture, and food studies for many years. While this practice is often cited in current sources as a way to improve small gardens for individual use, its historic value lay in larger scale implementations designed to nourish, nurture, and sustain entire communities. The great majority of this research has been created by scholars who were not members of the indigenous communities which originally developed and maintained this tradition. Thus, this short review strives to elevate indigenous authors and practitioners wherever possible, while acknowledging the bulk of the available publication originate from work that did not center their voices. The cultural aspect. The Three Sisters model was not just a means for modeling a specific intercropping practice, but was a significant cultural and spiritual construct. Lewandowski in 1987 of the Three Sisters in Seneca Life, Implications for Native Agriculture, says, De Heko, the Three Sisters, had been cultivated for at least 500 years prior to contact by the Seneca, an Iroquoian tribe inhabiting western New York State. The Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash, pumpkins, and gourds, were planted together in hills, in fields, cultivated and harvested by work parties of women. The Three Sisters was an important cultural complex. The sisters are protagonists of a number of Seneca tales, myths, ceremonies, and legends. The Carnegie Museum of Natural History broadens the classification from the specific Seneca nation to that of the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, in its description of the Three Sisters. To the Iroquois people, corn, beans, and squash are the Three Sisters, the physical and spiritual sustainers of life. These life-supporting plants were given to the people when all three miraculously sprouted from the body of Sky Woman's daughter, granting the gift of agriculture to the Iroquois nations. According to Leanne McMillan, sums up the practice thusly: the technique for planting the Three Sisters spread from Mesoamerica northward over many generations, eventually becoming widespread throughout North America. Indigenous farmers saved the best seeds for the following season, resulting in a wide variety of cultivars perfectly suited for the environments in which they were grown. Much of this diversity was sadly lost as indigenous nations were forced out of their ancestral lands by early European settlers, and mainstream agriculture practices took hold. In the area that is now considered northern New York, the Haudenosaunee, that is the Iroquois, made use of companion planting, and the Three Sisters were an important part of their diet. Known as the Iroquois by the French and the Six Nations by the British, the Haudenosaunee existed as a matrilineal democratic form of government in North America long before European incursions. The Haudenosaunee considered the Three Sisters to be divine gifts. Some versions of their legends involve the crops personified as three women who separate from each other only to find out that they are stronger together. The Carnegie Museum of Natural History also provides useful description of just how this method was carried out. The Iroquois agricultural system was based on the hill planting method. Iroquois women who were responsible for farming placed several kernels of corn in a hole. As a small seedling began to grow, the farmers returned periodically to mound the soil around the young plants, ultimately creating a hill 1 foot high and 2 feet wide. The hills were arranged in rows about 1 step apart. Iroquois women mixed their crops using the system called interplanting. 2 or 3 weeks after the corn was planted, the women returned to plant bean seeds in the same hills. The beans contributed nitrogen to the soil, and the corn stalks served as bean poles. Between the rows, the farmers cultivated a low-growing crop such as squash or pumpkins, the leaves of which shaded the ground, preserving moisture and inhibiting weed growth. Christina Gish-Hill provides some background analysis of how these practices were carried out on a systemic level. By the time Europeans reached the shores of the Americas, the indigenous people of the northern continent had developed food systems that efficiently utilized their abundant landscape to provide a relatively nutritious diet. Three Sisters agriculture also developed as a central food system in both the north and southeast. The Iroquois and the Cherokee called corn, bean, and squash the Three Sisters because they nurture each other like family when planted together. These agriculturalists placed corn in small hills, planting beans around them and interspersingly squash throughout the field. Beans naturally absorb nitrogen from the air and convert it to nitrates, fertilizing the soil for corn and squash, and in return, they are supported by winding around the corn stalks. The squash leaves provide ground cover between the corn and beans, preventing weeds from taking over the field. These three plants thrive together better than when they are planted alone. The multicultural research team of Lindsay Lunsford provide a blunter view. In 1619, an English ship landed on the shores of Powhatan Confederacy, or as the English called it, Point Comfort, Virginia. The ship delivered stolen people into stolen land. This was the first step in founding today's U.S. food system. Until that time, the people of North America and West Africa had lived off the land for millennia, foraging, hunting, and cultivating food. But 400 years ago, the twin European colonial influences of invasion and enslavement entwined their lives to some extent, the foodways of Native Americans and West Africans in what is now the U.S. Archaeological and scientific aspects. Some indigenous people of the Americas planted corn, beans, and squash or pumpkins together in the mounds in an intercropping complex known to some as the Three Sisters. The corn provided support for beans. Beans provided nitrogen through nitrogen-fixing rhizobiobacteria that live on the roots, and squash and pumpkins provided ground cover to suppress weeds and inhibit evaporation from the soil. While the origins of the Three Sisters complex are unknown, veneration of the Three Sisters appears in the earliest accounts of European explorers and missionaries in North America, and as described by Lewandowski from its earliest appearance in written records, the Three Sisters complex was not simply an agricultural strategy or technology, but a cultural complex complete with stories, ceremonies, technology, customs, and etiquette. Archaeological evidence dates the adoption of the Three Sisters complex in North America to 1070 AD. The complex was adapted to local conditions over the 500 years before contact with Europeans, so much so that it was dominant food plant association of every nation practicing agriculture in the Northeast USA, as well as in several other parts of North America, including southern regions of Quebec and Ontario, Canada. The Indigenous people practice the Three Sisters agriculture in northeast USA, southeastern Canada, including those from at least 15 nations. And this is from USDA government, Department of Agriculture. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.